Hi, and welcome back to CSA's AI Summit. I'm Jim Rivas, CEO of Cloud Security Alliance, and we've got a great keynote panel here, Deploying AI and the Gaps in Our Compliance Frameworks. And we've put together just, I think, a terrific group of people that sort of cover different aspects of this that are going to give us some really, I think, helpful perspectives that holistically are going to give you some guidance on how we need to be thinking about this over the course of the next few months and into the next couple of years. So let me start off by asking Avni to introduce herself.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Great to be here. Hello, everyone. My name is Avni Desai. I am the CEO of Shellman. Shellman is a third-party audit firm that focuses on cybersecurity assessments. And AI, as you probably can imagine, has been a goal for us in 2024 with our clients asking for attestations and certifications surrounding this. So great to be here, Jim.
Right. Thanks a lot, Avni. Let's go next to Vijay.
Hey, thanks, Jim, and hello, everyone. My name is Vijay Balina, and I'm representing Google DeepMind, and I'm the Chief Information Security Officer and also the Head of Cybersecurity Research.
Cool. All right. And Jason, you want to go next?
Yeah, I'm Jason Clinton. I'm the CISO at Anthropic.
All right. And finally, last but not least, Troy.
Hello, everyone. Troy Leach, Chief Strategy Officer for Cloud Security Alliance. And among my responsibilities or past history is looking at some of these frameworks. I helped develop PCI standards and frameworks around that 20 years ago and talked about some of those similarities and differences that we see with trying to sandbox some of the elements of AI today.
All right, let's get started. And the topic here, it's top of mind. It seems like we're seeing so many new innovations. It's just day to day, week to week. We're hearing something about, well, you don't use AI for this. Oh, now you do. Oh, it can't do this. Oh, now it can do that. So, I think that just we could say organically, there's just no doubt that we're increasing our reliance on AI systems. And so I think some of the question is, how can organizations just strike this balance between like getting the benefits of AI, but then also like the barriers are like, how can they be sure that they're ensuring the privacy and security of their user data? And Jason, if you don't mind, I'd love to have your thoughts first on this.
Yeah, so as reliance increases, the way that we think about privacy and security will change reflective of like what the AI system is doing. And I think maybe to frame my perspective here, anytime we think about compliance frameworks or the way that we approach these things systematically, we need to think about what is the capability of the system and what is it connected to. So I think everyone would agree that your autocomplete AI on your keyboard is not the kind of thing that we need to worry about from a regulation perspective or a compliance perspective. Maybe there's some questions there about bias, but it's not going to be a dramatically impactful thing, and it doesn't have access to your private data. But conversely, the most capable systems, as they become deployed in systems that have retrieval from databases or where they have decision-making capability, which is the reason that people are excited about this, those kinds of systems need extra scrutiny. So I think about this as a sliding scale. People should be concerned about the most capable systems and the most sensitive data. And then, as you get to less capable systems and, maybe even some of these open weights models that aren't demonstrating much in the way of capabilities, there's less concern around those than there is around frontier systems.
Cool. Yeah, I totally agree. I think on that perspective in where we've got to have our most focus. Maybe Avni, what's your perspective here as an assurance person?
Yeah. Well, I think to achieve equilibrium, I think there's several key principles. One, and you're going to hear this often, it's going to be like the transparency and accountability. I think is foundation. Any organization who is going to adopt AI needs to make sure that they have a transparent approach. So how do AI algorithms work? What data are they using? What is the purpose that they're going to be employed? And that's how you're really going to build trust and empower the user. And also, how are you going to make sure that you're going to have informed decisions about sharing that data? So clear lines of accountability within their AI development is really key. And And if you look at the EU AI Act, if you look at, what the White House came out with, trustworthy AI and responsible AI is written everywhere. Two, it's data minimization. How do we make sure that we reduce the risk of data breach and limit potential harm? I mean, this is foundation. This isn't just AI. We talk about this when it's any other system that's out there. But because we have the potential of teaching the LLM a lot of learning, we want to put as much data in there, but we have to make sure that we're protecting user privacy, but also gaining the valuable information. And the last thing I'm going to talk about, I'm in the world of security. So I have always talked about shift left, security by design, but I think privacy by design should really be integral in the AI development. So how do we make sure that we are integrating privacy controls, specifically jurisdiction-based, state-based, however, at the very beginning of the AI development to ensure that privacy is not an afterthought, but it's built in to the AI system. So those are kind of three areas that I would think about, as organizations step into this.
Yeah. I mean, very fair enough. And, for me, I think back to just like the early days of Cloud Security Alliance and cloud adoption too, where the idea of transparency is obviously really important, but you just get surprised so many times by the business, and that kind of goes to your shift left, which has always been a challenge. That, oh no, we're going to get a lot of these. You have an AI system through like something out of an app store or a SaaS application that it is tied to some of the more sensitive information that Jason was talking about. So maybe we'll have to think through some strategies through this talk on how we can figure some of that out. Troy, maybe you could go next and give us your perspective. And, as you were mentioning in your intro, you got a pretty good financial services background and where that sort of fits into this as well. It'd be good to hear.
Yeah, and the financial service industry, we're actually going to be talking about this in the next CSA Summit, just how that industry has invested for quite some time in machine learning and AI. So they have a little bit better grasp. I think you're seeing already some of the benefits. We talked at the beginning about personalization of financial opportunities for people, being able to reduce fraud rates and just the probability to identify where some of those risks are. So I think the financial service group is a little bit more advanced in already their familiarity with AI. I think their biggest challenge is also they're one of the highest regulated. So we already talked about EU AI Act. We've talked about some of the other ways that we're looking at. Avni did a great job of talking about some of the biggest things, transparency, and how do we demonstrate, because there's such a randomness, right? There's this stochastic principle of AI where we put in some input and you may not get that same output back. And so in the financial service space, I think they're looking at, okay, how do we assure that the data sets we're using is not going to violate some forms of privacy? Are we making sure that we have good enough tests and balances for bias as well? We talk about financial loans and things of that nature. So I think one of the biggest things that I'm seeing is just emphasizing the point of how we get to trustworthy AI. And in the financial service, they're used to, okay, the only way we get there through assurance is that we have tests and a roadmap, and we have measures that we can look at and say, this is actually doing enough due diligence to say we've done the right thing to protect. So I'm starting to see financial service industries use the power of these large language models, but what they're doing is forming some form of API or additional add-ons that are starting to do validation checks. So there's a step of verification. Did the AI, based on the prompting that we gave it, did it actually produce what is intended for the end user, what they will see? And if not, let's put it back through the model again and make sure that what we're producing is not going to violate some of these regulations.
Cool. All right. Thanks, Troy. And yeah, the idea of like the output matching the input, and maybe generically the concept of like what we're building and the emergent capabilities and how are we proactive around providing insurance around that, I think it can be pretty interesting. Vijay, so I had Jason go first, and we had some different perspectives there. What would you like to add to this discussion?
Yeah, thanks. I think a lot of what was said has been top of mind in industry, and for me, in my perspective specifically, there has been a big convergence on trustworthy AI and what we're calling responsible AI. And generally speaking, those encompass various different aspects of security, privacy, fairness, accountability, transparency. But I think the important thing to remember is that this is quite a nascent set of technologies. They are rapidly changing. And a lot of times when we think about deployment and the benefits of these technologies, we think about the associated risk. So every business is going to have a different risk tolerance for the types of use cases that they're interested in exploring and the types of capabilities that they'd like to leverage in the current state-of-the-art system. So it is very specific, like autocomplete on your keyboard, your set of risk and your approach to risk and managing that risk may be slightly different than if you had a system that was highly capable of doing a set of tasks over a long period of time.
Mm-hmm.
So the way that we think about the benefit is gonna really differ on the types of capabilities that we're thinking about and the types of controls and the types of security and privacy types of approaches that we're going to want to take are going to really be dependent on those types of deployments, the types of tolerance that we have when it comes to risk, and the types of information and or data that we may be dealing with at that time as well, depending on the form factor of the deployment that we may be employing for our end users or our specific products and services that we're exposing to end users and or potentially third parties.
Mm-hmm. So, as you know, we talk about this is being integrated into everyday operations for organizations, like in real time. Organizations they have sets of tools already to deal with its risk management, security. It's technology tools, processes, methodologies, risk management frameworks. So the question is, as this becomes more integrated, how can organizations update their compliance protocols to ensure transparency and fairness in the AI-based decisions that, how we're using AI to go do this, and that can fall into explainability, other areas. So Vijay, could I go back to you on that? I'd like to have one of our
Yep.
AI people start with this.
Yeah, I think this is going to be extremely important. Having an attestable or verifiable method of what data or information is being used in that decision-making process is going to be absolutely key. And likely going to be the set of information that's going to be requested by regulators, auditors, and even end users if they want to have a deeper understanding of why a decision was made the way that it was made, as an example. And moving to a regime that has some level of explainability baked into the decision making workflows is going to be absolutely critical and important. And end users of these systems should have access or be able to understand why a decision was made the way that it was made, and have some method that they can have some trust in, which kind of bleeds into the broader aspect of having trustworthy AI and having a set of systems or technologies that end users are comfortable with. And this takes time. And it will be a tricky balance that I think we're going to have to deal with going forward, in the sense that, this technology is rapidly evolving, and ensuring that end users are part of this journey and are firmly understanding the types of changes that are happening when it comes to using these systems, the way that they access their personal information or personal data, perhaps, and the way that the information may flow out of the system and into other systems to make those end-to-end decisions.
So, Avni, if I go, you hearing what Vijay said, which, kind of, I think, laid it out pretty well how this is going to need to be understood and managed. In your role, you've done a lot with assurance. You've got a lot of understanding of auditing of systems. Maybe you could even be a little bit of a proxy to what like the regulators might be thinking about this in various places around the world. Like what is going to be necessary like to get that right level of transparency, and what do organizations need to change to actually kind of take what Vijay articulated and have that be not only something that is palatable and works for that organization internally, but for their customers and for like whoever they are accountable to.
Yeah. Well, great question, because traditionally compliance frameworks, they really struggle to keep pace with evolving technology. I mean, we saw it with cloud. I mean, the CSA, you guys took that by the horns and, with the CCM. But I think what we're starting to see right now is there's definitely significant steps in the right direction. Both Troy and I have mentioned the EU Act, ISO 42001, state laws, the executive order. And one thing that I am seeing in all of those is, data quality and bias mitigation. So like, how can organizations make sure that their data sources, again, we talked about minimization of data, but I'm talking about minimization of bias. How do you detect and mitigate bias during the decision-making process? So that's definitely one. The second one, and in my wheelhouse, is the monitoring and auditing. Auditing isn't, we know, I mean, it's a point in time, it's a look back, right? And we've talked about continuous auditing and monitoring all the time. And I think this is really going to be key, because how do we monitor AI systems to make sure we're rectifying any discrepancies? And this is bias, this is hallucinations, all of that. And so conducting audits is a baseline, it's table stakes, but how are we making sure that that ongoing compliance with fairness and, again, transparency? Again, some of the things that are table stakes and that we're seeing in a lot of these regulations are employee training. How are we making sure that employees understand the ethical implications and the responsibilities of AI-based decision? And the last thing that I'm going to say is, the regulatory compliance framework, it's changing. It's constantly changing. So how are we making sure that when we make decisions that we're not only looking at traditional compliance frameworks, but we're really looking at the intricacies of AI decision making? So there's a lot going on, but I would say, you have to prioritize data security, you have to prioritize encryption, access controls, anonymization, but all these other things, which I feel like are newer, right? We haven't really talked about data quality and bias mitigation. We haven't really talked about ethical frameworks and, other technologies. So bringing that into what we have seen from as a baseline of other technology.
Mm-hmm. So does anybody want to go out on a limb and say they have issues with the EU Act or the new ISO standard? Is everybody happy with?
Well, go ahead, Jason.
Happy to see progress there. I did want to bounce off something that that she said just now that I think I really agree with. Avani, you made a really good point, which is the transparency in the auditing is probably the most important aspect here. And one of the places where we see the biggest problem is that we do not yet have a lot of capability on the evaluation side. And that is concerning, because to evaluate a frontier model, you really need sophisticated folks who've had experience doing prompt engineering and know how to do a scientific assessment of bias. All of those issues require a certain amount of sophistication on the part of the auditing firm. And I think one of the things that I'm worried about, and speaks to just how fast things are moving, is we do not yet have a robust evaluation ecosystem. And that means that if you want, as a customer, to say, is this model that I'm deploying meeting certain benchmarks, there's not really an empirical way that you can do that right now. And I think that that's one of the places where we're all collectively going to see a huge explosion in investment in the next year as new auditing and evaluation firms come online and get more sophistication around this.
That potentially, like, boutique organizations that really are focused on AI specifically, or a specific AI type of practice? Is it not going to make it holistically just in
Yeah, just what I'm seeing emerge so far is that I think traditional compliance organizations and audit firms are going to continue to serve in that capacity, but they're going to need to contract out with firms that are specifically capable of this form of scientific-based evaluation, empirical-based evaluation. There's only a handful of those in existence right now. I can only think of 3 that exist off the top of my head. So I think that over the next year, we should see 20, 50 of those organizations, and then maybe in some of the audit organizations that have the budget to hire data scientists and machine learning engineers, they can build internal teams that have those capabilities as well.
Got it. Cool. So Troy, I'm sorry I cut you off.
Sorry.
Yeah.
One thing I would
Go ahead.
Jason, I think you're so right, because the other area that we're seeing is API security, right? And do we have the right, we do pen testing and so forth, but do we have the right skill sets, especially with AI and all the integrations? I think API security is going to be a big player as well, and you don't see a lot of that out there. So I completely agree with you. I mean, these special skill sets that we haven't had before. I mean, and we're technical auditors. I mean, special skill sets that we haven't had before, I think are going to come up. And you're right, Jason. Either we're going to have to upskill, we're going to have to train, or we're going to have to, work with a third party. Yeah.
Troy,
I'll just build off of what both Jason and Avni were saying. I think there's 2 levels of this, because I think there's a challenge that Jason's articulated, especially around these frontier models, being able to evaluate and some form of assurance and trustworthiness of them themselves, and that's very difficult. And I think I'll tie this back to your question, Jim, on the EU Act, and as well as just overall regulation. I think one of the challenges that we have is all these enterprises that they use them. There's going to be accountability for them. What type of data, possible PII that they put in of their customers into a model, what assurances that they demonstrate. But I think at the same time, and cloud is a great example. I think over time, cloud became much more customizable and manageable at an enterprise level, and you could demonstrate various levels. Sometimes it would be outsourced and it would be more dependency on the cloud service provider. Sometimes it would be more dependency on the enterprise to configure correctly. I think you're going to see elements of that. I think some of the hesitancy or concerns that I'm hearing from the regulatory community is around, okay, these large models that you're using, all the updates are out of your control, some of that transparency we've already talked about, and it becomes very expensive and time consuming for even a large enterprise to build and fine tune these models themselves. So I think there's going to be some accountability looking there. I think going back to what I like about progress in regulation in EU Act is that they are a risk-based approach. So there is a qualitative nature, and I think where regulation does well is that it sets optimal goals of these are the things that you're trying to protect, and these are the ethics and moral code that we want to live by as a community. And I think where they struggle, and Avni said this earlier, is that sometimes you get into these very niche compliance frameworks that don't get updated very quickly, and we're in the space that moves very quickly. I think we're going to be needing to have a good playing field, but there just needs to be a lot of flexibility of that. And I think what I have hoped for, and just going back to the last comment on continuous monitoring and some of the auditing challenge we've had, I think AI is actually going to be one of the biggest assets we've had to actual true transparency of what our networks look like, and being able to leverage it in so many ways to have a more true state of what the current security and overall confidence of the network is based on the AI. I think, Jason, you're the one I heard this comment from many months ago of using AI to do some of the compliance regulatory accountability, doing automated compliance. Mm-hmm. I think that is going to be such a relief, because we're going to put all of our good security people off on doing good security work rather than having to do much more documentation. I think that's going to be revolutionary for the industry.
I've kind of wondered about, when we talk about the future of cybersecurity, AI against AI, AI for malicious purposes, AI for virtuous purposes, and we're just going to kind of battle it out. And I'm also wondering if that, from what you said, Troy, is there like a call for the emergence of like, a frontier LLM that like watches the other LLMs and sort of audits and monitors them as well, because we are talking about like capabilities that are going to surpass what people can do. So I'm just sort of wondering how, to what, Jason was talking about, this emergence and this, we need these experts that really understand this, but this is going to be just changing so rapidly. And so I think there's definitely a lot, and we maybe talk about some of the other questions to think about, how is this really going to play out, and how are we going to be able to take advantage of these capabilities most appropriately. So that kind of leads into like this next question, which is, should there be standardized guidelines and certifications for AI systems and privacy features that help facilitate this? Is it more prudent to have like tailored controls for unique applications? And, I think too, like a lot of like, maybe you take FISMA or you take some security requirements I've been familiar with, that they're very prescriptive, and they will prescribe, here's the length of a password, if you're going to be compliant. Instead of saying maybe, well, make use of the current state of the art for protecting, for doing authentication, which can include a lot of different things and let you evolve. So there's sort of this level of abstraction that I think we need to do in our certification and our standards for controls, and then a way for it to reflect like what state of the art is. But Jason, can I go to you first for your perspective on this?
Yeah, just briefly, and then I'll hand it off to VJ, I think. So when we think about a deployment, we should be thinking about approaches that scale with the domain. And a couple of different places this has emerged already in the industry. Google's Safe AI framework, which is why I think VJ, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Mm-hmm. Anthropic has the responsible scaling policy, and OpenAI's is the responsible deployment policy. These are frameworks for thinking about the domain in which a system is deployed, the capabilities of the system that we're talking about, and the kinds of problems that might emerge. I think one of the things that I would love to bring into your question, though, is that what we're talking about existing today is not what will exist in 6 months or 12 months from now. And we will see the next iteration of all the major models, probably in the first half of this year, just if we keep pace with what's happened historically. And then towards the end of the year, we'll see another round of model development and deployment. And when we think about that pace of innovation, we need to be planning for what it looks like to have increasing levels of intelligence deployed in business making processes. And, if the impact is a customer and a customer service chatbot gets the wrong answer to their customer service question, that's different than a AI system making a decision that has life or death consequences in a critical system. We need to think about those kinds of capabilities, emerging a year from now. We need to be out ahead of it. So I'll hand it off to VJ, and VJ, I'd love to hear your perspective given the Safe AI framework.
Yeah, thanks, Jason, and thanks for referencing SAFE, or the Secure AI framework. The way Google's been thinking about this is aligned with what you just said, that we will see rapid progression in this technology and step change in capabilities pretty quickly, is what we're thinking. And when we're thinking about the Secure AI framework, we knew that we couldn't just go in with a set of standards and controls that we think that folks could adopt and then realize that the next few months that they become more or less obsolete. So we took a step back to create the Secure AI framework to really think about what are the broader aspects of a framework that can be employed by organizations to safely develop and deploy AI technology as it is emerging and as it's kind of being deployed across the world in various different deployment scenarios and use cases. And I think there could be a baseline set of empirical methods that you use to measure the capabilities and or associated security and privacy guarantees that you expect these systems to have. We kind of think of that of securing the AI system itself, not just from a deployment standpoint, what you would see in those settings, but also while it's being developed and the types of things that could go wrong while it's being developed. And this kind of bleeds into maybe the responsible scaling discussion that has been happening over the past few months as well. And these are all important considerations when you think about the way that you want to maybe govern and set guidelines around how to think about the security and privacy guarantees that you expect these systems to have. And I think there's still some expansion, still some thinking to be done here. If you were to maybe revert back to the payment card industry and the way that they were thinking about ensuring that any organization that stores, transmits, or processes cardholder data, that they must align to these very specific controls. I think we can maybe distill and maybe say that there are some core set of expectations that if you are deploying an AI system, that you follow these broader set of guidelines, or maybe even to a certain degree specific controls. The regulatory landscape right now is quite fluid in this space, so I think we're going to see some expectations and some very specific requirements come down from that angle. But then I think it's really going to be driven on the way that businesses choose to employ the technology as well. So if you're in a financial industry and you have millions of customers and you have access to their financial data, the expectations are going to be much, much different than if it is a forward deployed chat interface that people can use from a consumer standpoint and what you would expect from that standpoint.
Yeah, just to add one brief thing on top of what Vijay just said. This goes back to the earlier question too. We, I think, as the Frontier Labs, have already thought about scaling in a way that goes with the model capabilities, and you've seen this emerge already in trust and safety systems. And so we have deployed AI models. I think all of us have. I don't have any special knowledge, but that's my understanding, that observe the inputs and outputs of these models, and we are using AI to improve and constrain the trust and safety harms that could potentially be coming out of scaled abuse and things of that nature. So we're already seeing these kinds of approaches be deployed in these systems.
Yeah, and to what you were saying earlier, Jason, I think there is a very small group of organizations that are probably capable of assessing current state-of-the-art systems to the degree that we expect them to be assessed. But we do expect those groups to grow. But I think one thing that we're going to need to do, at least in the way that we think about empirically testing these systems right now, how do we converge on a set of evaluations or a set of methods that we can all agree on, or the types of things that we care about as an industry, regardless of maybe the deployment setting. And then those are going to be the standards or guidelines that we expect the broader of industry that are choosing to adopt that technology to align with. And I think we're going to figure that out. I think the Cloud Security Alliance has an important part to play in that. I think organizations like Google are going to really want to spearhead and lead in some of those discussions as well with the Secure AI framework. And we are positioning ourselves to kind of do that as well with our external strategy.
Before I go to some of the others, Jason, too, is there anything different as you sort of view the different frameworks that the frontier models are doing, that or are they more similar or more different in certain of the focus?
They're more similar in spirit. I'll defer from calling out any organization here. I don't intend to throw anybody's effort under the bus in the answer to my question. I will say, though, that it is very much the case that as we approach these sort of responsible scaling policies, that we think about the future. And so when we look at the way that these things are being written, and I should point to the AI executive order as well as the EU AI Act. Both of them call out specific benchmarks where they want to ratchet up the level of attention In the White House order, it's 10 to the 26th flops for the model, and in the EU AI Act, it's 10 to the 25th. In both cases, though, you can see that from a regulatory perspective, the governments are recognizing that there is a difference between a weak model and a strong model, and we need to be thinking about that as we design the controls as we go forward. And if you're a customer and you're thinking about deploying AI, if you're deploying an in-house model that you took from an off-the-shelf open weights thing, maybe you think a little bit about trust and safety, but it's not that that's not that capable, and so it's maybe perfect for your application, but not necessarily the kind of thing that needs a very large amount of oversight as these governmental regulations are calling for.
Cool. Fair enough. Avni, I wanted to hear your perspective here on what you've heard. They've kind of gone pretty deep into some of this from the frontier model perspective, but what do you think's needed to make sure that the guidelines and the certifications that we have now, is it like some standardized thing that can be applied to a lot of these different areas, like the different scenarios that Jason mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, I think it hinges on a lot of things, right? Technical and regulatory factors. So maybe I'll talk a little bit about both. Like standardized guidelines and certifications, there is a benefit to that, right? You get consistency, you get clarity, you can expedite an evaluation process, interoperability. That's really what I'm seeing, especially from a global perspective on AI with EU AI, ISO 42001, and then global compliance, right? But I think there is a short following that there could be over-regulation and there could be stifling of innovation. And that's what I worry about, right? When we have, standardized guidelines, right? So the complexity of making sure that we create comprehensive standards, I think, is going to be a technical challenge. Tailoring controls, though, I think it's very innovative friendly. You have a risk-based approach. And I think that's one thing BJ talked about from a secure AI framework perspective, right? And I think that aligns better with privacy and security measures. You get a more precise strategy. But then again, we're going to fall short, and organizations, and one thing that Jason talked about is it's going to demand a deep expertise of AI, privacy, security, algorithms, right? And I think that's something that organizations are going to lack. So again, the upskilling, are we going to have those 20 companies out there that can also do that? So there's going to be, at least in the short term, I think, a balanced approach that's just going to be a blend of both. And that's what we're seeing. We are technical auditors, so we're able to kind of go out there. But some of these other companies, who are used to control-based, risk-based audits are not able to. I hear it often. Clients will say, well, I want a more robust, I want a technical audit, I want to do a pen test, plus I want to be able to, prompt engineering. So I think we're going to have flexibility for customization, but that technical and risk profile for each AI application is going to have to be a pretty deep understanding and a pretty deep audit for us to say, yes, we feel like there's a robust privacy and security aspect in the AI system.
So am I wrong in thinking about this, that what's going to be different in how we think about compliance frameworks now is we've got to get more abstract at sort of this high level, domains or control objectives that aren't going to change, and they sort of represent these key areas of concern, and then realize a lot of the technical controls are actually in the controls that you may tailor for something. That's going to be something that, that's not going to be chiseled in stone ever, and that's going to be continuously changing. Is that kind of the model on how we need to put these together?
I think it's a blessing and a curse at the same time. I think, my experience has been that, and we're all security-minded people on here. So I think we have a call and a focus on making sure that as these things are built, something you said earlier, Jim, about building this in a flexible way to make sure that there's assurance, but because we are, as Jason said, the innovation's happening so quickly, not holding down to archaic ways of validating. I think the challenge is history has shown that there's a lot of enterprise that are not as security focused, and they're going to do a baseline minimum in order to get to their ultimate goal, which is not to secure the system, it's to provide whatever benefit they're trying to bring to market. So I think there's a balance there. And just if I could go back, because VJ gave a little shout out to my little baby of PCI and what we did there 20 years ago. I think it does resonate with what we're doing today. So when we were creating PCI and then the main framework, the data security standard, the biggest things was there was major technology changes and there's a shift. All of a sudden, data storage became substantially less expensive, and all these enterprises were able to take data, use it in their customer relationship models and their management practices. E-commerce was being embraced, and so all of a sudden, there was the shift of how we use data and how the enterprises interacted with our customers. And I think we're going to have the same thing with the AI. The difference here is that, it was a singular type of data, and these models are going to have all different types of forms of aspects. So I think it's really going to pivot how the previous FISMA and PCI and HIPAA and HITRUST, all these things look at this model that contains a variety of different needs. I think I will say, and several people have mentioned this already, but how we formed PCI framework was there was a conflict of other frameworks, right? So Visa had their framework, MasterCard has ours. I built the one at American Express, and there was conflict in industry that made innovation and made progress difficult because they would actually conflict. And so I think coming together with a common framework, what CSA, what others are doing as well, is important, because without that common framework, there's going to be this stop and start to innovation.
Yeah. Obviously, I'm biased, but I would agree with that. I would endorse that statement, Troy. So, Avni, do you have any just on the role of where you play in the industry, independent auditing oversight? Any other thoughts on what that role should be and how it might be different?
Yeah. So look, I think there's a vital role in auditing and oversight. And some of it is, I think, going to be things that we as auditors do right now: compliance verification, risk mitigation, objective evaluation. But I think the two areas, though, where independent auditors can really bring in their subject matter is technical audit. So beyond evaluating AI algorithms and data, I think technical audits, I touched a bit on API security assessments, I think penetration testing, vulnerability assessment. We need to make sure that our audits aren't just looking at really high level. Tone at the top is really important. Risk-based is important. Having a strong information security policy, all that. But making sure that our auditors are focusing on the robustness of the AI system infrastructure, resilience against cyber threats, going in and really providing technical audits so you can identify, remediate security vulnerabilities, and making sure at the end of the day, right, there's no exploitation by malicious actors. I think the second area is really going to be model explainability and interpretability of the audit. So, the traditional model evaluations, how can auditors focus on, explainability of these AI models? So, how well are AI systems providing clear explanations for decisions? How can auditors either become AI experts or collaborate with AI experts to evaluate the model's ability to generate meaningful explanations, right, for complex outcomes? So again, ensuring that AI systems are accountable and they can be trusted, they're trustworthy, right? They provide the level of comfort. So, this is new, right? How are auditors making sure model decision-making process? And so I think those are two technical areas in addition to what auditors do, right? Looking at policy, procedure, people, technology, but also looking at these two areas.
Cool. All right. Thanks, Avni. I'm looking at the time here, and we've had a really good conversation. We got just a little bit more time. And I'd pose this to Vijay and Jason, and I think they both sort of mentioned this, and I've heard Jason sort of mention this in some other talks. Is we've got to be careful about being too hyper focused on what's in front of us today and not lose sight of how things are going to going to change here soon. That being given, organizations like they've got these mandates to go do this and do this safely and securely. So when we think about like maybe your guys' concerns about like the key, what do you think are the key vulnerabilities and the key issues that organizations need to be thinking about? I'm not saying of the AI systems. I think the question's like associated with it because it's not necessarily those systems, but our understanding and usage. But EJ, what do you think are the key things that the listeners out there should be thinking about in terms of what they should be concerned about?
Yeah, I think it really depends on the deployment setting and or use case that an organization is trying to address. And depending on the use case of what an organization is going to be using this set of technology, I mean, they could broadly fit into, again, these buckets that we hear often, like security and privacy and fairness and accountability and transparency. I think these are all aspects of any system that will employ AI to do some set of useful tasks for end users or businesses alike. And the degree of which you focus on each one of these is going to really just depend on what you're trying to do. And so the way that you approach each one of these areas is going to be either directed and are provided guidance through formal standards and maybe associated controls through standard setting bodies, or they could be best practice that are instantiated and communicated through things like the Secure AI framework, or they could be a set of standards that are maybe audited against by independent third-party auditors when it comes to each of these three areas. So it's hard to say which we think, what we think is going to be the most critical. But if I were to kind of take a step back and think in the frontier AI space, one thing we know for sure is that we want this set of technology to be in the hands of end users. And when we think about end users, we think about personal data. So what we know is that there's going to be an important and critical aspect of privacy that will always be there, that we need to be mindful of and pay attention to. And you see a lot of the regulatory discussions happening right now that actually specifically mention privacy enhancing technologies when it comes specifically to AI. So I think privacy is going to be absolutely critical. It has been critical in the general sense across a lot of what we do when it comes to consumers and our expectations as service providers and technology platforms to protect that personal information. And each, like in the United States, each state has their own definition of what constitutes a privacy breach or a data breach and requires a set of disclosure requirements. I think those will all be expanded to encompass the employment of AI and the usage of personal data. And so just to maybe get into the weeds a little bit, as an example, in certain states, if the personal information was encrypted, that's not considered a breach. In other states, they kind of get into more details about whether or not there was a key associated with the breach and whether that was disclosed or had unauthorized access, which then will translate to a breach. But what does that mean in terms of an AI system that is constantly on, constantly interacting with you and your personal data, your email, your calendar, your messages, perhaps, or your business data that may have HR data as an example? And what does a breach look like in that setting, right? So there is always going to be an emphasis on privacy and personal data. We think these systems are the most useful when they interact with us and at a very personal level. So we're going to expect a lot more personalization to happen over this year and going forward. We're going to see the most usefulness in these types of settings. And that automatically translates to, well, okay, if you're going to provide usefulness to me on a day-to-day basis in a professional setting or maybe even a personal setting, but you're going to require access deeply into all the things I interact with, my search history, my email, my calendar, my messaging again, where I go, where I don't go. This is all highly personal information. And if that's what the system is going to require, then how do you think about what is going to be important to protect that information? Are you going to employ some privacy enhancing technology like differential privacy, maybe to ensure that the AI system is using that information, but it's doing it in a privacy preserving way, potentially? And so I think if we were to, think ahead just maybe in the next few months, I think we're going to see a lot more ideas around how to personalize this set of technology that could be useful for us in a vastly different way that we haven't seen anything else be able to do.
Mhm.
And if that holds true, then things like privacy of that information and the security guarantees that we expect of that information and the way that the system is going to be using that information is going to be absolutely critical. And you could guarantee that we're going to expect some regulatory conversations happen around those specific use cases probably. And a lot of the standards bodies start to converge on those types of controls, if you will, as well.
Yep. Cool.
Thanks, Vijay. I guess just one real quick addition to what he said. I agree with everything that Vijay just said about privacy. And I think that one of the ways that I've been thinking about this is a lot of the people who are going to be listening to this recorded talk are going to be compliance professionals who are having engineering teams come to them for the very first time saying, we want to deploy AI for this business application. The very first thing that I would do in that position is if you have a team come to you and this is the first time that you've looked at an AI model accessing your data, ask the engineering team for a block diagram. Tell me where the AI system is connected to other systems. Like actually, approach this from a data governance perspective. If you have your information stored in your business with privacy implications tagged as such, then if the system is connected to that, please tell me how this AI application is going to be segmented from, let's say, the sales application of this data as well. And so as a compliance professional, just go back to first principles. What goes in and out? What is the model provider providing in terms of information about what's their data retention policy? All the old questions that we've all had to answer in a cloud-related context and logging-related context. What are the logs? What's the retention policy? Where's the data flow? Who are the sub-processors? All of this stuff will help answer these questions in a way that's very, very tractable in the short term.
I think that was from both of you really good feedback on what people need to be thinking about. And it's very, very much data oriented in terms of having a very mature and holistic view of that now is going to really move you forward. This has been a wonderful conversation. I want to thank all of you, Jason, Vijay, Troy, Avni, for your insights here, and for our audience. Hope you enjoy the rest of our sessions at the AIS Summit. And this was our panel, Deploying AI and the Gaps in Our Compliance Frameworks.